Hello everyone. For Chapter 8, we're going to be looking at the cellular basis of reproduction and inheritance. So for this first video, we're going to be looking at how cells reproduce and the different kinds of reproduction and cell division, and then we're going to be looking at the differences between eukaryotic and prokaryotic cellular reproduction. So for an introduction, you may not think of it or know it, but cancer cells are related to cellular reproduction. Cancer cells start as normal cells, but mutations or some faulty DNA coding causes them to lose the ability to regulate their cell division. So cancer cells can divide and spread, invading nearby tissue or even unfortunately traveling throughout the body in metastasis. But this can disrupt organ function, and then unfortunately when you affect so many different organs or you affect the function of some systems in the body, it can ultimately end up killing the host. So uncontrolled cell division is harmful, and that's what cancer is. It's uncontrolled cell division. However, your body is constantly in a state of normal cell division. All your cells in your body at some point have to be replaced. I say all, but in relative terms, almost all the cells in your body are replaced over your lifetime. And this is true for all the organisms that we know of. At some point in time, the cells have to be replaced or rebuilt in some fashion. So let's talk about cell division and reproduction. So what is cell division? It's the heart of the reproduction of cells and organisms because cells originate only from pre-existing cells. Remember, this goes back to cell theory. Some organisms reproduce through asexual reproduction, producing offspring that are all genetically identical to the parents and to each other. So basically they're clones of each other. And then other organisms can reproduce through sexual reproduction, which creates a variety of offspring. And then some organisms can do both. Some organisms can undergo sexual reproduction and asexual reproduction, really depending on opportunity, the environment, the stage of the species' life. There's a lot of factors that affects when a species will decide to do asexual or sexual reproduction, or it can do both at the same time. So we'll talk about all those coming up in the next few weeks, especially when we get to evolution. We'll start seeing differences in organisms and how they reproduce. But on the cellular level, let's look at different kinds of reproduction. So this here is an example of asexual reproduction. It's yeast cells, and they are undergoing what we call budding. So yeast cells will literally create a copy of itself, and it will bud off or eventually pinch apart and create two identical cells. So they are identical genetically, but two separate individuals. Another form of asexual reproduction, this is starfish. And starfish can either come from, like for this part is either partitioning or part of the starfish lost a segment of its body, and so it's able to reform or regrow the parts that were lost. So this is another form of asexual reproduction. And then, of course, plants can also undergo asexual reproduction. Plants can undergo asexual reproduction and sexual reproduction. And sometimes it's easier to undergo asexual reproduction for some plants. And this is very easy. We all do this. If you take a clipping or a cutting of a plant or a leaf and you try to get it to root or grow, so literally what they've done here, it seems they've just taken a leaf and stuck it into the dirt and it's growing into a whole new separate plant. And then there is sexual reproduction. So the main difference between asexual and sexual reproduction is that sexual reproduction creates variety. Variety actually tends to lead to species being more survivable. Variety creates new genes, new combinations of alleles, and it creates, in many cases, the ability to survive new and different habitats or responses to the environment. So this here is a family picture, and you can see because of sexual reproduction, every single individual here is different and unique, and they have, yes, they have similar characteristics and traits, but they're all different versions of the species. So here is a cell dividing, and you have two cells. This is under a light microscope with the microtubules here are fluorescing. These blue globs here represent the nucleus. So this cell is starting to split apart here. So that asexual and sexual reproduction is mainly associated with eukaryotic cells. Prokaryotic cells, though, they reproduce asexually by a process called binary fission, a term that means dividing in half. Most genes are carried on one circular DNA molecule in prokaryotes, where compared to eukaryotes, they have different strands of DNA molecules, which we call chromosomes. But in prokaryotes, they have just one singular circular DNA, which can still be, it can be very long, but it's still just one strand that is circular. And it constitutes the organism's chromosome. Remember, we call that the nucleoid when it's all congregated together. So as it replicates its single chromosome, the copies will move apart, the plasma membrane will pinch inward, and then more cell wall is made, and eventually the two cells will pinch apart and create two daughter cells. I haven't mentioned that yet, and I'll go ahead and do that now. In biology, when you create new things, new cells or new copies, they're always called the daughters. So a parent will give rise to two daughter cells. And this here is just a review of what I just mentioned. You have a parent cell here, and so it has to first duplicate all of the chromosomes and proteins and ribosomes and everything else that two cells would need, but mainly it's the duplication of the chromosomes. So this is one long circular chain of chromosome that has to be copied into two. And then that cell will grow, it will get larger and start to grow apart, and then it will rebuild a cell wall in between these two. And then at the end of that division, you now have two daughter cells. And so that represents binary fission. That's really it. It's nothing more complicated than that for prokaryotes. And this is just showing you an example of prokaryotic cell division. Literally the exact same picture here in transmission electron microscope image. So this cloudy substance here is the chromosome that has been split. There's two copies, and the cell wall is starting to build between these two cells. And then once that cell wall is built, they can start to pinch apart and become two separate organisms.